Hi everyone, welcome to the IPython development meeting for Thursday, November 20th. Today on our agenda, we have
notebook actions, the keyboard shortcut cleanup that Matthias is doing.
Yeah.
So, do we really want to discuss about the name of each action now for 24 hours, like non-stop meeting?
Well, I think it's much more effective to have this conversation in person than on the pull request. And I think to me it's not each name individually, it's more the broad
basic principle of...
Yeah, exactly. The principles of naming, so we don't have to argue about every single one. That's.
I can make everything like pseudo-private with a leading underscore, and we can push that to.
That doesn't help anything.
I just don't see that as really solving the issue. People are still going to use it if they want to customize their keyboard shortcuts and.
Yeah, but we can make that as like a provisional API for 3.0. Like I really would like to at least have this PR working, merge, then go through the menu and the toolbar, so that at least everything is done for relatively early to be tested. I don't want to spend a lot of time discussing on the scheme of the name of notebook action.
Well, what do people think?
Yeah, I guess we can figure out the names in a separate discussion. I mean, we definitely should before we release anything.
Yeah. No,
but it doesn't, since obviously nobody's using it yet because it doesn't exist.
Absolutely.
And they're not going to suddenly start using it and get mad that we renamed things for something that's been in master for 2 days.
No, I'm fine I'm fine iterating on it in master, but I definitely think that we need to have a very well thought through set of names before we release.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
So postpone and review the other parts of the PR?
Yeah, just the implementation technical stuff. Sure.
Okay. Sounds good.
Okay. In that case, language metadata. Too bad Thomas isn't here yet. So,
do we want to rotate that, slide that down in the agenda?
Kind of. The next thing is Thomas's own PR, which is also related to this, actually.
Yeah, let's just move those down. And John, do you want to fill us in on the Canvas-based text editor?
Yeah, I don't have a demo prepared, so I would like to fill us all in with more details next week, but I'm working on a Canvas-based text editor, kind of like a code mirror replacement. I don't have too much done yet. All the rendering works, the selection, highlighting. I even have rich text working, so you can have different row heights. But I'm in the process of optimizing it. Right now I'm working on an event manager, kind of like GitHub's Atom text editor. They have a really cool event model. So I'm trying to model it after that so we can make it modular and use our own events with it and have a nice rich API. But yeah, next week I'll give everybody a full demo.
Cool. So as I was doing dishes last night, I was thinking about the text editor and a lot of the problems we've had getting all of the event and focus logic right with CodeMirror and the the modal keyboard shortcuts.
None of that applies to the edit, single edit, right? Because it's always focused, all the time. So we like there's no need for a keyboard manager at all, because just like in a regular text editor, right? There's a cursor in the area. The thing is edit. The thing is, it's basically you're in edit mode all the time.
What if you go into command mode and edit a different cell?
You will sorry, in the single file editor.
Ah, okay. I'm sorry, I wasn't tracking you.
Sure.
No.
So currently the plan, at least as Thomas is doing it, and I totally agree, is to not have any keyboard manager, any of that at all in the single file editor.
Okay. Okay. No. Absolutely. I'm following that. But my thought was that the main usage case for the Canvas-based text editor is in the notebook for performance reasons.
Yeah.
And so that, and also there's just a lot of subtle event handling that we end up doing in terms of propagating events and deciding who handles the events. And so I think we just have to think carefully about that, especially like with the tab completion, where there's this really awkward pattern where we need the editor to be typable in. I don't know, but we also need the tab completion thing to be focused. And so
that will go away once we use code mirror completion module.
No, but the idea is that we will completely stop using code mirror altogether.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's actually. I'm not sure that's actually going to happen.
Yeah.
Right, because we can deal with code mirror performance issues, a lot of code mirror performance issues, by not instantiating code mirror for every cell immediately, and so there are lots of ways we could deal with the performance issues that don't involve abandoning code mirror.
Well, but I mean, I guess there's a couple different performance bottlenecks. One is code mirror instantiation.
Yep.
And there, yes, absolutely, you can address that by only instantiating them lazily. But the other is the number of DOM elements on the page and the redrawing that's required for that. Even if we don't use code mirror, if we do syntax highlighting in a non-Canvas-based context,
that's a lot of elements.
I don't know if it's the same number of elements as code mirror, but it's still a lot of elements.
It should at least be the same order.
That would be a lazy loading of cell. You shouldn't load the cell at the bottom of the screen when they're not on the page yet. I mean, you should remove the cell from the DOM when you scroll down and up, like remove the top cells and append at the bottom and vice versa. I mean, you shouldn't load the whole notebook in the page. I mean, that's just crazy.
I absolutely agree with that, but it's still not.
One of the reasons why the page redrawing is super slow right now, it's because of the pager. Because every time you scroll the inner div, everything is recalculated, is redrawn. And if you do the layout correctly without the pager, then the whole thing is computed once and just scroll. Just open your web browser, go to NBViewer, take the same notebook on NBViewer and on the live notebook, open the developer tools of Chrome and have the checkbox like highlight, repaint area, and you will see on the live notebooks that every time you scroll 1 pixel, everything is redrawn. So the main bottleneck is not the number of elements. It's just because everything is redrawn all the time.
Yeah, this is actually something that I noticed by accident in my use print instead of the pager. Scroll performance is dramatically better because the pager's just not on the page. So I think John's kill the pager PR should actually help that a lot, because it should solve the problem Matthias is talking about.
Okay.
I mean, Canvas is definitely, if you got a lot of stuff on the page, Canvas is definitely the way to go. I'm yeah. We'll see.
Yeah, no, and there, I don't. I agree with everything. Yeah, although I think the only thing I would say is I I think we still may end up in situations where we might want to use the Canvas-based text editor rather than CodeMirror in the notebook. I don't know. We'll just have to see. Maybe the performance, once we do lazy loading of cells and fix the pager, won't be an issue, but
Yeah.
that's...
And once it's got Vim and Emacs mode, right?
Yeah, and some popularity. It has 0 popularity right now.
Yeah.
So we'll see if anything comes of it. It's just a pet project.
Yeah, cool. Very cool.
Cool.
Kill the pager?
Yeah, so John and I were talking, and I think, and actually we were talking even before this performance issue came up, and I wasn't aware of that exact performance issue, was sort of how to get this into 3.0 and how we want to handle it. I think there's two main options. One is to do the full-blown removal of the pager, scrolling the entire page, and enable all outputs to be pop-outable. And so you can still have output content that you can move around the page. The other option is to kill the pager, and as of yet, not get into trying to replace it with making all output pop-outable.
And how much simpler is that? Is making just the pager a floating thing? How much simpler is that than making pager an output and floating everything?
Making pager an output is the simplest. What do you mean? Making pager an output is the simplest thing.
So I heard two options. One is making pager an output and making all output undockable.
Yep.
And the other one is just make pager output go into some undockable thing that's different from the pager thing at the bottom.
Well, go into just regular output.
Wait. So
one option is kill the pager, and the second option is kill the pager and replace it.
Oh, okay. So
Yeah.
okay.
I mean, I think the question is, are we okay with 3.0 having pager just be output? Or do we want for 3.0 pager to be output and that output, arbitrary output, to be, pop-outable?
I will again be annoying, but I still don't see the problem with the pager.
Other than the performance problem you just described.
Yes, but it's fine. I mean, we lived with it for years now, and it works.
I mean, I found it unlivable a year or so ago, and so I don't use it. But
Yeah, I have long since stopped using the pager, and it's currently broken in master.
What do you mean broken?
I would say half the time when I open a notebook page, the pager starts out in a half-revealed stage. There's some misordering of events or miscomputation of the pager size, and it's neither collapsed nor expanded, and you can sort of resize the window of the browser and close it, click it to collapse it, but it doesn't open a page in a reliable state. No, I mean, and after living with pager as regular print, I really think it's. I mean, it would be nice to occasionally be able to pop it out, but I think for most usage cases, having it just be print, even not pop out, is far superior to the situation we have now. And I should say, I mean, part of the question for me, Matthias, is after 3.0, it's very possible that we'll move to a page layout with the notebook that provides us a lot more flexibility in having other content areas. And it's not clear to me that it's worth, for 3.0, trying to make the notebook itself have all these different content areas if we're going to just get rid of that afterwards.
I guess there's a kind of an implementation question of what would we change. So right now the print page extension just replaces page with print on the kernel side. So it does. So what happens is actually just a print statement, and so it shows up in regular output.
Yes.
Are you thinking of doing that and actually getting rid of the notion of a pager from the message standpoint? Because right now,
the way that
an important
now,
difference. Go ahead.
Okay.
But an important difference is, right now, and this is also something that can be annoying, but is kind of 50-50 whether it's what people want or not, so you can't really decide. But pager output is not included in the document. The pager output is a transient. It's something that you're looking at to help you write code, but it's not part of the document that gets saved. And actually, the first time I wrote the print pager thing was for Chris Fonnesbeck. It was like, I want NumPy question mark. I want that to be in the notebook on NV Viewer. So that was actually saving the print output, saving the pager output as real output was actually the point of that initially. And then only later did I use it to say I don't actually want the pager to happen anymore. And those are in some ways separate questions.
Yes.
Of how you put it on the page, and then whether the notion just shouldn't exist at all. Because if you're using it in the Qt console, it makes a lot more sense, right? Because it works like the terminal. And so if we just did replace page with print, that actually wouldn't. That would I think that would make the adversely affect the Qt console maybe. Or you're fixing a problem for something that's a severe problem in the notebook, but that's not a real problem in the Qt console. If you do it at the kernel level, but you could do it at just how the information gets on the page.
That's how I do it. I just redirect it on the page, so it's still the same message that it is in master, but then at the page I redirect it to the standard out.
And then, so then reloading the page, it looks like there's an output that goes away.
Reloading the page, the output persists just like the rest of the outputs.
Okay, so you make it a regular output, it just doesn't come as an output message.
Yeah, exactly.
And I do use the print version of pager like Chris does very often, where I actually want to persist that content in the notebook when I...
Yeah, and although that's less of a... There's two separate questions there to me.
Yeah,
one is capturing the output of question mark as an IPython kernel feature. Right, that's something we can't do because question mark kind of by definition calls page. If you execute foo question mark, it calls page, and that's probably not correct, right? Maybe by default it does, but question mark you should be able to make that just output, because I even have that problem in the terminal that I want to look at the question mark, but I also want to type. And it would be better if I could scroll up and back rather than having to open and hide the pager. So that's a slightly separate...
Is pager content currently a MIME bundle?
Yeah.
Okay, so that is... Yeah, okay, that's good.
Although in the pager area, so I made the message a MIME bundle. In the pager area, I think, because we haven't moved the MIME bundle code somewhere reusable.
Right. It doesn't use
only plain text is actually handled in the pager area.
If I recall,
by moving
in the way that I did it in the PR, the MIME bundles are used.
Yeah. So you make it a display data.
Yeah.
Yeah. That makes sense. Okay. Yeah, I don't.
I mean, I guess I think there's a lot of questions here, and I think after 3.0 we're going to have to explore this, especially as it relates to different content areas on the page.
Mm-hmm.
I guess my preference for 3 would be to fall back to a sort of the simplest and deal with a slight loss of functionality just to improve all the problems we have with the existing situation. And then the thing, I mean, I think there's absolutely a usage case for having pager output in the notebook, persisted as output, and also in a separate content area.
Yeah.
And maybe, honestly, maybe they're just two different abstractions, and I don't know. Now the question, maybe the more important question for you, Min, is do we need to change anything about the message spec?
Yeah, because I've also got the issue of, let's think about payloads, because we haven't thought about payloads since we really formalized the message spec the first time. I don't know if you want to do that right now, but just kind of revisiting the entire concept of payloads, because they're pretty much undocumented, and I don't know, we should just think about what they are. So there's an issue kind of going over some of it.
Yeah.
And the question is, should we make payloads, should we make payload an IOPub message type?
Yeah.
And just going over our list of payloads that we currently have, which right now includes a couple that nobody must use because they don't work anywhere, and a couple. Basically, the ones that we use are pager and set next input.
Yeah, and I should say if we move to a UI layout after 3.0 that has multiple content areas,
mm-hmm.
I think we very well may, or I think we have to reconsider having floating content above the notebook area itself. I think that makes much more sense when the notebook is an entire page itself. If the notebook is one pane within a larger layout, I think that makes less sense.
Yeah.
And so I'm a little hesitant to add new sort of pop-out content on the notebook area itself at this point. And who knows? I mean, it could make sense moving forward, but I feel like that. I don't want us to more fully embrace that at this point without first figuring out how are we going to deal with a more complex page layout in general.
Yeah, I feel like maybe we should hear from Fernando on the what's okay to lose in the pager.
Yeah, I would,
obviously I'm okay with losing the pop out, and so are you. But that just because we don't like it doesn't mean there aren't a bunch of users who do.
Yeah, I will say as a user of the notebook, the pager is actually one of the most useful features for me. Particularly the thing that I use it for with a lot of regularity is, you talked about like the single question mark being fine to print because there's only sort of a little bit of content. I actually use double question mark quite a bit to look at implementations of things, which is usually a much longer layout where it makes sense to be able to scroll up and down within something.
Yeah.
With some regularity, I use that to look at like complicated pandas functions or NumPy or matplotlib stuff pretty regularly.
Yeah.
And that's also a case where, like in the terminal console, you don't want to be able to type because you use the keyboard to navigate through a longer. I also agree with the case where, like for the single question mark, often it would be better to just have it print and then be able to type based on looking at the doc string.
Yeah, and in some ways that's an IPython kernel API question of like we should in IPython we should be able to say send question mark to the pager, send question mark to output, and the same for both single and double question mark.
Yeah.
And we can't right now, so we're kind of putting that decision on how do we handle pager output, and those are actually really separate, in some ways separate questions that we should, taking us as two independent projects that happen to consist of exactly the same people and in the same repo at this point of the IPython kernel that has question mark and double question mark, and then the notebook that Jupyter Notebook, Jupyter Message Spec that has the notion of output going to the pager.
Yep.
People working in the IPython kernel should be able to decide whether this goes to the pager or not. And in some ways, that's a bit separate from how the front end handles pager output, like what it means to put stuff in the pager. And
I mean, the other thing. Sorry.
Oh, I was just going to ask Nin, when do you think Fernando's joining today?
I don't know. He said he sent an email earlier this morning saying he was coming in, but he would be late, so don't wait for him. It's. I mean, maybe we could just leave it how it is and just try to do a simpler version of a statically located pager that doesn't require reflowing the page every time, because that's not it's not actually required to have something at the bottom of the page to mean we do the relayout stuff that we do. It's just required because of how we implemented the pager.
Yeah, that's a good point. We could just use a static div, statically positioned div at the bottom of the page. And
so we might be able to fix that problem just directly.
Yeah, and I could do that in that PR instead of trying to implement a generic pop-out.
And then maybe do generic, and then maybe revisit the kind of the bigger question in next time around.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that's interesting about those like question mark and double question mark specifically is that the way that you interact with them, like there are abstractions that are supported in both the terminal and the notebook, but like the way you want to use those, the way that you interact with them are different, because in the terminal your workspace, like your visual space and your workspace are sort of have to be the same, whereas in the notebook you have much more possibility of separating the idea of like where I'm typing and where I'm working from where output is being displayed.
Yeah. No, I do think it's a fairly conservative approach to kill the pager implementation that we have now, but just re-implement it in a way that is not broken. I feel like that's a reasonable thing. And then I also think the question of the message spec and also the IPython kernel API for putting content into the pager versus output is something we should think about. And it may, I don't know, I mean, even if we just fix the pager implementation like John has done, I think we want to allow users to choose to have.
Yeah, I think that's solvable with just a configurable flag on the magics or whatever that's like pinfo1 pager true or false, pinfo2 pager true or false, and you could just set those two without redirecting all pager output. But that is almost all of the pager, or almost, that may be all of the pager output that I produce, right? Is with question mark and double question mark.
Yeah.
I don't think I don't call it directly. A PyCat might use it too.
Okay, so let me, so the, I mean, so this is at least a proposal. Fix the pager implementation.
Yeah, but don't change anything kind of logically about how we deal with it.
Yeah.
Uh,
I can do that. The PR that's open now, I think, is like way out of date. So I'll just re-implement it in a different way, fixing, kind of using a static div instead.
Output to the to pager output. So next is make it configurable in IPython kernel to redirect pager to output, and then continue to rethink payload messages. Yeah, I mean, let's run that by Fernando and get his read on it. Yeah, no, that's.
Yeah, there's a bit of a question of whether we redirect the pager in general or pinfo in particular.
Yeah, no, that's.
But yeah.
Okay. I would be completely fine with this solution. I feel like it fixes the implementation problems of the pager and also the user interface for people who want to use pager as output. So.
Okay, that sounds good.
Matthias, are you okay with that plan?
Yep.
Okay. Great.
Should we hop back to the language metadata? Now that we have Thomas?
Yeah. Hi, Thomas.
Hello. Sorry, mate.
Hi, no problem.
So, language metadata, we're finding that there is more information about languages that we want in various circumstances. Things like pigments, lexer, code mirror mode, MIME type, file extension. Currently under discussion is how to make a comment in a script.
Yep.
I think actually now we've got MIME type, I think we can get rid of code mirror mode and pigment lexer because they both have lookup tables by MIME type. We should be able to.
Will that work for distinguishing Python 3?
Yeah.
Is there a separate MIME type for Python 3?
Possibly not.
In any case, we're finding that information about the language is something that grows. And we initially had language info in the kernel spec. But with the kernel spec being what seems like a very static thing, and the kernel knowing about itself, it seemed not quite right to put language info in the kernel spec, because the kernel spec should really be about getting the kernel started. And then, so we moved language info to the kernel info request, so it's requested at runtime.
If we do that,
Right.
then all old kernel will not be able to highlight.
That's not true. So right now we do it by language, so we identify the highlighting by language name, so it works for at least Julia, and basically every language that we can highlight. If we can highlight by name, then it works fine. So language info is an extra field for. So right now, kernel spec has a language field that has always been around. That's just the name of the language. And then there's a language info dict that has this extra stuff for things like MIME types and.
This is kernel info reply, not kernel spec.
Sorry, yeah, kernel info reply.
So could we just take a step back for a second? I feel like
Yeah, sorry.
I want to understand everything. So when a notebook starts, the notebook document has the kernel spec saved in it?
It has some.
And so the first question is, what is saved in the notebook document? And then how is that information used in a sequence of requests when that notebook is loaded to initialize the kernel state?
So at present, the notebook has two separate things in metadata. There is the kernel spec, which is used to tell the server, what kernel should I start for this notebook, and there is language info, which is used to determine like how should I highlight this. When I do ND convert to script, what file extension should that have? Well, it's not used at present to do that. I have a PR that makes it do that. And when the kernel starts, the notebook makes a kernel info request, and the reply from that includes language info, which it then puts into the notebook metadata.
Okay, so it uses the kernel spec to start the kernel.
Yeah.
And then does a kernel info request to initialize that additional information.
Yeah. And that information is then also stored in the notebook so that it will highlight correctly if you don't have the kernel installed.
And
technically,
what if,
doesn't need to start a kernel, because once you have started the kernel once, the kernel info request is cached, if I remember correctly. So as soon as the notebook server knows about the kernel, you can get the info about the kernel without starting one. So it doesn't prevent the delayed start of the kernel, if we go toward delayed start.
Yeah. And what information is in the kernel spec?
Now it is just the identifier of the kernel spec, the display name of what we're calling that kernel spec, and how to start the kernel, which includes the command line arguments and the environment variables being optional.
Okay, and if kernel spec gets updated on disk and a notebook tries to start that kernel with its existing kernel spec, how does that update process?
Essentially, the bits for starting the kernel are not stored in notebook metadata. So effectively all that's used from the notebook metadata is the identifier. So it will say like start me a Julia kernel, and it's up to the server to work out what that means.
Okay, perfect. So I will file an issue, but I think there's some bugs in the sequence of those request replies. I'm running into situations where that either there's a deadlock or race condition or something weird going on where some fraction of the time, maybe 10-20%, the kernel initialization process doesn't actually complete.
With what kernel?
This is the standard Python 2 kernel.
Sure.
Okay.
Well, yeah, we can chat about that in the issue, but I will ask you your Tornado version.
Okay. So and part of it is I wanted to understand the sequence of different metadata blobs and requests to the server, and so the things under discussion now, the language info are in the kernel info part of this.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And so the tricky thing, the thing that doesn't, again, is basically we haven't found the right home for the language info, because it didn't seem quite right to put the language info in the kernel spec.
Yeah, I agree with that.
But now we're putting the language info. It's fine to put the language info in the kernel info reply. That doesn't bother me. But putting it in it means we have an increasing amount of small bits of information that are currently stored in every notebook. And it doesn't seem right to me to have in every notebook, you know, in the notebook metadata, information about this notebook, the pigments lexer that's used for the language it's written in.
Yeah, I guess what would be the consequence of not storing the kernel info in the notebook?
The language, the consequence would be that things that depend on that, like highlighting, would fail in context that aren't running the kernel. So like highlighting, export to script with NB-convert wouldn't work because you would need to start a kernel to ask what the file extension is. If it only lived in a kernel info reply and didn't live in notebook metadata and didn't live anywhere else.
To me,
we have thought about alternatives like, you know,
That's not technically true. You should at least start the kernel once on your machine, and we can cache the result of the kernel info reply and then highlight without starting a kernel. I mean, if it seems fine that if
the issue is that we're caching that information now in the notebook itself, right? And that means that we're caching this information, you know, for me in my case, hundreds of times identical information.
So it should be cached then in only one place.
Yeah, so that's essentially what Thomas and I talked about over lunch, which was basic. So just like we have kernel specs, we have a language info registry that is separate, that like kernel specs is looked up by language name. And we could even have, you know, a public registry online, just a simple JSON file, list of JSON files. That's just basically this language info data. And I don't know. I mean, that
would be fine with me. We can even attribute ourselves an UUID to certain kernel to exactly be sure that you don't have two different kernels.
So you're thinking about removing that information from the notebook document entirely, and providing an API for other parts of our infrastructure to get that information?
I think the API isn't so much the challenge as where is that information.
Yeah, it seems it seems important to be able to get that information without starting the kernel.
Okay, that's the main idea.
Yeah, because there are various NB-convert, like NB-viewer, right? If you took that out, things on NB-viewer wouldn't work.
Yes.
And the absolute simplest place to put that information is in the notebook itself, because then you don't have to look for it. Yeah. But it means and I wouldn't have a problem with that if it seemed like a really tiny, but the problem is it seems like a growing amount of information, and it's necessarily always the same, right? That these are the things I should use to treat something associated with this kernel or this language, that I should be able to change that one time, and it should affect everything I have without reopening and resaving all my notebooks.
Yeah, no, I think from that...
Like the CSS style.
I'm just waiting on
You don't want to store your CSS style in the metadata.
Fernando.
No, Hey!
Hey, everyone.
You sound so awake.
I made it back. I'm back.
It's like
So,
50
Fernando,
What's that, Brian?
we've arranged for you to have a full-blown spa treatment and massage for the rest of the day.
Yeah, I pretty much need it, and I actually was planning on staying home and just taking the call from home today, and then I realized that we had agreed to meet. I had agreed to meet with William Stein, who's in town later today, and I was not happy to leave home. I'm wiped, jet lagged. I hate JetBlue. It's been horrible. The last 2 days of travel it took me 2 days to get home, from like 36, 38 hours total from basically from home in Medellin to my house. So I am not a happy traveler right now. But
I'm sorry.
very happy to see everyone, and yeah, just never mind me. My brain is fried, so I'll just be kind of listening in and catching up. But carry on. It's good to see everyone. And
We
Matthias,
have a question for you.
Matthias, it's good to have you as an official, fully paid member of the team. Last night, the last email that I saw was the database transaction in the Berkeley Human Resources Systems. You are an employee of UC Berkeley. Congratulations.
Yay!
It's great to have you, and Kester and anybody else from Google who's here. Thank you so much. Thanks so much for making that possible. I saw the official transaction last night on the HR database.
Yay!
Yay!
Question for me?
I think we had discussion on the pager and everything, and you need to.
I'll catch up later.
Yeah.
Let's.
Yeah, I think we came down on a less controversial position than we were before. So I think that.
Okay, Min and Thomas can fill me in later today, and I'll slip back into development.
Okay.
Sorry, there's one face that I haven't seen before. Can you?
I'm guessing that's me.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm Scott Sanderson. I'm at.
Oh, cool.
And we're building a bunch of IPython stuff. I've been contributing to Jupyter Hub and some of the sort of higher level notebook server management stuff.
Awesome. I knew of you. I just didn't recognize your face. So it's very nice to see you. Yeah, I knew who you were by name, but not by face. Cool. Gotcha. Great to have you at the meeting.
Yeah.
So yeah, carry on wherever you guys were.
Yeah. So it's figuring out where to put the general question. There's a small question that relates to a couple of PRs that there are a couple of typos in that reveal something that we just need to decide on. And maybe we can get to that after. But the general question of just where do we store information about the language? Do we store it redundantly in every notebook, which means we don't need to come up with a new place to store stuff? Or do we go as far as Thomas and I had proposed to each other at lunch of maintaining just a generic registry on the internet of information about languages?
There's no way that's a slippery slope, right?
Yeah, I mean,
register programming languages.org
and where, or do we do something in between where we have this database ships with IPython or Jupyter or something like it's a package you install. Nothing seems great.
I suspect trying to catch this discussion sounds interesting but also complex. I suspect trying to catch me up productively right now is just going to disrupt the flow of the discussion more than it'll help. So why don't you guys just continue and make as if I wasn't here, and I will listen intently, take notes, and then over lunch you guys can fill me in more of the details.
Yeah. So
I think it does make sense to have the information in the notebook simply be a pointer to the actual information. My only concern about that is that if it forces more requests and delayed notebook load time.
So this information doesn't delay notebook load. It delays getting the highlighting right.
Not technically, you could, because the notebook goes to the server at load time from the disk, the server could look up the information in the cached registry and add it to the model, not in the notebook, but in the model itself, so you could already have the highlighting.
Yeah, that seems complex, but I think, yeah, I mean, you can still load the notebook, and I mean, you can load the notebook and it will appear unhighlighted, and then asynchronously you can look up the code mirror mode, so the highlighting will appear after a fraction of a second.
Right. So this doesn't get in the way of even executing code. Brian, you talked about some issues of kernels starting. Now that actually does get in the way. It's also a kernel info request, but it's not the same one. The notebook server itself, when it starts a kernel, makes a kernel info request in order to perform message spec version adaptation.
Yeah, okay, I understand.
And that blocks the WebSocket on the front end in the notebook doesn't finish opening until until that reply arrives, which means for things that start up slowly, like Julia, it takes a while to spin up a Julia process.
Not anymore.
Okay, it takes, with Julia Master as of 2 days ago, it takes a couple seconds to start. And in which case, you'll see, kernel busy for, the kernel won't become responsive for a couple of seconds. With IPython, it's usually, I don't know, quarter second or less.
Yeah, so I may be seeing this.
Do you have a bunch of imports, maybe, in your startup files or anything?
I still have this weird situation where there's time, I have a fully updated Mac, but there's times where it takes the notebook server itself like a minute to start, and it takes kernels 10, 15 seconds to start.
And quick question, Brian. When you see that behavior, do you see it just for the first kernel, or do you see it also if you open a second kernel? So you think it's an issue of hard disks caches, or do you have any sense of?
I don't.
Okay.
It doesn't.
Super hard to diagnose.
I can't imagine hard drive caching would be that bad on a modern Mac, because before I came here to work, I was quite keen on testing IPython cold startup time without a disk cache, and even on my few years old, relatively cheap laptop, it wouldn't take more than 5 seconds or something to start.
Yeah, the main thing that I recall associated with 30-second 30-second lags was DNS that we do when I think there's a DNS lookup on localhost or something on startup of the notebook, and I think probably on startup of the also on startup of the kernel. No, not parallel. I mean, it probably affects parallel too, but on anything we have that deals with the network. So basically everything other than plain terminal IPython. And so if you've got weird network, like, does this maybe happen more when you're on a plane, or when you're on public Wi-Fi that you're maybe not logged into?
I haven't been paying attention to that. I'll debug that as a separate.
But I think that's only if you install Netafaces or something, then there are no DNS lookups. I'm not 100% sure. No, I think that's right.
I think we're getting sidetracked and
Yeah.
debugging an issue here. It's probably
No, but it's related in the sense that since fairly recently, in the last period of time since we started to use the multiple requests and the kernel info request, my behavior has gone from an annoying wait to actual breakage if there's a wait.
Yeah, I guess if the process startup time is longer than the timeout on the WebSocket connection, no, but we already give up. There's already a timeout on the kernel info request, although it might be too long. I don't think so.
But in any case, I think that is a bug, and we should fix it. But we don't need to fix it with like 9 of us listening in on the conversation.
Yeah, but anyway, the language metadata thing. So there's, yeah, the bigger question is, where do we store language information? Do we maintain a registry of language information in IPython on disk that's like kernel specs? How similar to kernel specs are language specs? And does putting it back, because this started out living in the language spec, and then that started to feel icky. Especially if you have multiple kernel specs for one language.
But I mean, even then, we were storing it in notebook metadata. I mean, if we stored it in kernel specs and didn't put it anywhere else, then you have to. It's interesting.
Yeah.
Google's got a new thing.
Yeah. You can actually see chats.
Yeah, so if we store it in kernel specs and don't copy that anywhere else, then highlighting only works if you have that kernel installed.
Yeah.
Which I think, it seems to me we probably want highlighting to work. I mean, for ND Viewer at least, we don't want to install a bunch of kernels on. It might be that we can install a bunch of like language info files or something.
Yeah.
I think, to my mind, the only sensible proposals I've come across are either putting it in notebook metadata as we do in master at present, or maintaining like a centralized store of this information that we ship with IPython. And optionally, it has some way of updating that separately from updating IPython.
Yeah, we could do that either just as a package that is like, TZ info, right? TZ info gets updated all the time, and it's just basically a database of time zone info as a Python package. But probably easier than that is just having a local file or directory that just contains language info. It's essentially the same as kernel info, but maybe with the added notion of a public registry that you can pull from. Yeah, I don't really know. There's a small point that if we do keep it in the, there is an uncontroversial. There is just a bug in what we're doing right now that in so since this was moved to kernel info, in previous version of the kernel of the message spec, there was a language field in the kernel info reply, and there was a language field in notebook metadata. And then adding language info, now there's a dictionary about the language. And so there's just a small decision of, do we keep language as a key next to language info, or do we put the language name inside language info? And right now we're actually doing both, and we're doing it and that's where there's a bug, is we transform language next to language info in kernel info reply to language name inside language info in the notebook metadata, but we're actually not doing it. There's just a typo in that translation that prevents.
I would suggest doing it just once, and it seems if we need more than one field, then we should just do it in the dict and be done with it. That seems.
So move language to language info.name.
Yeah.
Okay.
It seems for simple. If we're going to have to go with a full dict.
Yeah, that's fine.
Is this still, since I had only seen the hackpad later, is this still technically 6945? Are we still there in the agenda, or have we moved further down?
We came back to that.
Okay.
Yeah, we came back to that.
Okay.
Yeah, and that relates. Okay, so I'll do that in that PR, and we can think about where the language registry more outside the meeting, because yeah.
I see Brian, but not his voice, so he may be on audio only.
Okay. ME convert to script. Do you want to talk about that?
Sure. I mean, I don't know how much there is to discuss. So at the moment we have ND convert to various markup languages and ND convert to Python, which obviously only makes sense if the contents of the notebook are Python.
Also, you mean ND convert doesn't have a universal language converter that knows how to write Python equivalent to Lisp?
But I mean, if you have a Julia notebook, then it should be able to export a JL file.
Of course.
And --2 script is
exactly that.
Is the way of doing that.
Yep.
So it kind of brought this language metadata conversation up because I added a file extension thing to the language info metadata in order that this could work.
To know how to, yeah.
Side note, asking your system for a file extension by MIME type, not a reliable question to ask.
What do you mean?
At least on Linux, the MIME database is designed to go from file extension to MIME type. So that way is reliable, but going backwards, there can be multiple file extensions mapped to the same MIME type, and it doesn't seem to have a priority order for them. So
and the extension to MIME type doesn't always work on Windows. We had the problem with CSS that was recognized as application CSS on Windows because of some other software that was missing with the registry, and then the CSS not applying on the notebook.
Yeah, I mean, technically it works. It's just wrong. I mean, it was wrong. I mean, if your system gives it the wrong answer, so yeah, I tried doing guess extension for text/plain and it said .c, and I tried for image/JPEG and it said .jpe, which I believe is valid for JPEG, but it's not one you ever see used for JPEG.
Yeah, nobody uses it.
Yeah.
So there's another option, which is to force the user to type the file name. Basically, to have the toScript option be one that requires an argument.
Not if you have the download as thing in the notebook.
That could provide a file name. It could provide a dialog. I mean, I don't know. I don't know that we want to do that, but
could. But
I'm not sure. Like... I'm not sure you can force. Can you force a prompt? I think to download it.
I thought you could, because I've seen, like, when you do download certain file types, you do get a dialog, but it could be that that's only if it's browser initiated by the browser UI and not by the page. I don't know. I don't know if a page event can force the file save as dialog. I'm not sure.
Yeah, because most of the ones that I don't know, but yeah, it comes up that there's information we want to put in this language database, and it's starting to become.
Yeah, technically there's no. I mean, the PR to do that is pretty simple on the whole. It's not.
Yeah.
It's not a technical problem. It's just, does all this information belong in notebook metadata? And for most things, I mean, so far for most things, it should just be language name, MIME type, file extension, I think, because code mirror mode and Pigman's Lexer, in the majority of cases, just looking up the language name should work.
Yeah.
And if we added looking up MIME type, then that would probably be still more reliable.
Yeah. Okay, so the next thing, try Jupyter with Kyle. Kyle.
Yeah, so we talked a little bit about this last week, but we didn't have everyone. Yeah, so should we dive ahead with... Did we buy the tryjupyter.org domain?
No. We ended up deciding to use subdomains. I think that was that conversation ended up, and let's not just buy it. Let's not buy every domain on Earth. Use
Yeah.
Try.Jupyter.
We don't want to just resell them after. Okay, so maybe I'll just go ahead and get that started then for the try stuff. I still kind of wish there was a better way for us to do the redirects so that people don't have what Min called really handsome URLs. So if you go to tempmb.org right now, it'll redirect you to #datacenter-001 or whatever, .tempmb.org/user-whatever. And it's pretty ugly right now. And I need them at least in that format so I can do SSL on top of whatever's there. Yeah, and I had suggested that we actually just iframe the whole thing so that people don't necessarily share around like the temporary notebook that they're working in. Like it really is just the try thing. So they don't get a path.
To iframe the entire page, you mean?
Yeah, like a full screen iframe that in the background is actually hitting.
Yeah, so the only URL they see is try.Jupyter.
What's that?
The only URL they see is try.Jupyter.
Yeah, and I mean maybe we show some other breadcrumbs to help them see where their path is, but yeah.
And you didn't do that because?
Actually, because Brian said he was like, well, there's a lot of useful information in the URL path. Yeah, and then it still does allow the like emergent behavior of people being able to share a notebook temporarily. Like say, oh hey, here's one I made.
Yeah.
So I wanted to bring it up again, and I think the iframe piece would be okay. The next part is, so because we're doing the redirection with the underlying server, like I want to keep that because it makes migrations really easy. Like I can throw a new node into the mix that has the latest version of IPython master. No problem. Yeah. So I want to see what other people think before I...
If you have links, they will open in the iframe, which will make weird things. Like if I click on metal and it's an iframe, then I am on tryjupyter.org and I see the documentation about on metal server on Rackspace.
Oh, so then we have to...
But all the links on the notebook open in a new tab, right?
What's that?
All the links on a notebook open in a new tab. Wouldn't that leave the iframe?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean that's what happens on the nature site.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think it's okay.
The only link that opens inside the page for us is the when you click on the dashboard, and everything else opens in the has target blank.
Yeah, so I think that's okay.
Okay.
I think it's worth a try.
Have you considered at all using cores and having a different domain for the server and the kernel? This is a very, very different question. But.
I've wanted to do that, but it was kind of out of scope at the time.
Sure. But the main reason I ask is that, like, the Google Drive front end will have a lot of issues with no matter what the domain name is, because it has all these restrictions on domain names. So I just thought I'll raise that possibility now.
Oh yeah. So I was actually hoping to integrate that as soon as so the Jupyter Drive project, the pieces that you've like extracted out from Collaboratory, I was hoping to just enable that on the try site if we let people log in.
Yeah, sounds great.
Yeah.
So it's just a matter of like you have to sort of whitelist specific origins.
Okay.
So I guess if it's in the, and I don't know how it will interact with the iframe stuff, probably badly. But even if it was just the original URL, it's like each sort of, I guess the full URL would have to be whitelisted with the Google Drive.
I would be slightly worried because it's a service that we would host and we mess with people's data.
Well, I'm not saying that we're going to do it right now. I'm saying that I would like to be able to do it.
Okay, but yeah, just see.
Yeah.
You know, that's an issue, but there are some security things where we have a much narrow, when it's done with IPython, Jupyter will be done with a much narrower scope that will only access particular files, not every file on drive. So that's less of a worry.
As soon as you persist things, people will say, "Hey, I can use that, and I will use persistent data, and at some point we'll have a bug on the thing, and the data will be lost. And it's even if it's something that we store and we can do whatever, we need a legal entity that deals with that and say, hey, if you lose data, we are not responsible."
So yeah, you'll always have some sort of access or control over data, even though you're doing it via the API.
Yeah.
But anyway, I just thought I'd raise the issue just to see where you stood on sort of using cores so that it could just be one domain for the notebook server and a different one for the kernel.
Okay.
Seems like now's not the time to do it in any case.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we can talk about it.
Sure.
But yeah. I don't have anything to contribute right now because I don't actually know how to break that stuff out.
Yeah. But yeah, if you want to get started on the try Jupyter and see what the iframe looks like and see how it goes. That sounds good.
Cool.
John, widget persistence?
So yeah, now that the promises PR has been merged, this is kind of ready for some review, but I just looked at it and it looks like it needs a rebase, so I guess maybe wait until I rebase.
Okay.
Sure.
That's it.
How's that going?
It's going well. It's so I have it's all kind of isolated inside the widget manager. There's a set state and a get state on the widget manager as a whole. The get state returns a promise. And then I've also provided a convenience method that allows you to just specify two callbacks, a load callback and a save callback. And the load callback, whatever value you return, is used as state, and the set callback accepts one argument, which is the state, and then you can deal with however you want to save it. And the calling of the load and set or the load and save callbacks is handled for you. Save occurs at the same time that notebook save occurs. And load happens on page load.
Are you putting that in local storage? Is that right? Or are you putting it?
Oh, that's just no. So I'm not doing anything.
Oh, you're not doing right.
API, and so in the example there, I use session storage, but you could do local storage, or you could put it on some server somewhere.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. But yeah, that's it. So go ahead and review it. It's just JavaScript API stuff.
Yeah. Thomas?
So
Profiles in the future?
this is something that Min and I have brought up in conversation a few times, and I just wanted to
Oh yeah.
other people could start spinning a background thread about it.
Yep.
When we split IPython and Jupyter, our profiles something that only belongs in IPython, our profiles something that only belongs in Jupyter. Do they share profiles as they effectively do at present? Do they both have profiles but they're separate things, or do we get rid of profiles altogether? I don't really think we're going to do that, but I thought I'd just include the full set of possibilities. Yeah, don't just start discussing it now, but just spin a background thread, think about what you would like to see happen with that.
Yeah, this is something we are going to have to think a lot about, and I've already. That thread has been running in my head for a little while, but it's a good idea to spin it in everybody's heads because it's going to be complicated, and it'll be good if people have thought about it in advance. So thanks for doing that, guys.
And Matthias has just added keep Python files as default config files, ? Or make JSON default.
Yeah, good question.
Which, I mean, for those who are not aware of that discussion, at present, well, so far, like the main config files are Python-based executable config files, which we also now have JSON config files, but I don't think they're used very much. We've now added front-end config for the JavaScript, and that only has a JSON part. the advantage of executable config files is that you can embed logic in them, so you can share the same config files between your Windows machine and your Linux machine or whatever, and say, if this condition set these config things, otherwise set these other config things. The disadvantage is that it's very hard to practically have executable config files in a context where you want to programmatically rewrite config, i.e. any kind of modifying config from inside the program, like preferences, dialogues, or anything.
Yeah, building UI that maps back to an executable file with arbitrary language semantics is effectively impossible.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you can.
It's called a
There
text
are things
editor.
you can do, but all of them are going to be confusing.
Yeah.
With some.
No. It's not worth the complexity, and it's brittle and hackish.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's not something we should do. So yeah, I guess there's a bit of a question of whether config should be edited by a GUI by default or by a human. I mean, directly. Both would presumably involve a human.
Yeah.
Most of the time, anyway. It's a question. I mean, I really like the Python config files. I use the conditional logic all over the place.
Yeah.
It's incredibly useful.
I think having them is fine, but I'm really concerned about the default one. I use the Python also a lot, and it's nice to have them. I think this should be reserved for power user.
Emacs has a system which is basically a dual system where Emacs uses a default config file which is hand editable, full of conditional logic, Lisp, and then in eLisp. But then they also have a config UI. I mean, granted, it's in Emacs's own version of a GUI, but it is a GUI, and that one writes. It also happens to write in the same language. It also writes eLisp, but it writes a different file. It annotates that file at the top with "this is auto-generated, do not touch, never edited by hand," etc. And that one is simply value assignments. It's a key value foo equals file that just runs down the page with assignments and no logic whatsoever. And they load. I think they load. Well, I don't remember, but there's an order. I think the auto-generated one is loaded last, I believe.
Yeah, that's exactly what we do right now, right?
Yeah.
We will load both Python and JSON,
Yeah.
and JSON is presumably written by machines, and
Exactly.
JSON is loaded last, so it gets highest priority.
So
Yeah, I mean, the
we could
confusing result in that situation is if you edit the Python config file and then the change you've made doesn't take effect because it's overridden by something in the JSON file.
Yeah, that kind of confusion can happen with the Emacs solution. I've had it happen to me, and it can be confusing when you think you've made a change, and then something else is setting that specific value, and you don't understand why your changes aren't taking effect. We'll think about it. It's a complicated set of trade-offs because I don't think there's one perfect solution to this question.
No, yeah.
We're coming on 11. Anything else?
Background thread spinning.
Okay. Good to see everyone.
Welcome back.
It's good to be back. See you all.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.